Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Metabolism and Menopause podcast. My name is Stephanie, and I am your host and CEO of Vitality OET. We are a women's nutrition, health, and fitness company that focuses predominantly on women's hormones, particularly as they start going through perimenopause and onwards. We know that you start experiencing so many changes in this time of your life, whether it be hot flashes, night sweats, irritability, brain fog, or weight gain around the middle that seems to have come out of absolutely nowhere despite you not changing anything. So you go back to those tried and true methods of cutting calories, cutting carbs, doing a bunch of cardio, yet it feels like nothing is working. You're putting in all this effort and in fact, you're just moving backwards. But we know now that your body is inherently different now that it's gone through these hormonal changes. So our mission here at Vitality is to really help you understand how your body changes in this time of your life so you can reach those health and fitness goals, feel in control and at home in your body again, live a life full of vitality, and really understand how to take care of this new body of yours. So today was supposed to be a podcast with the wonderful Coach Brittany. She did a great research and write-up on alternative forms of birth control because we did a podcast quite a ways ago where we went over hormonal birth control, the pros and cons, how it affects your hormones, and how it's going to affect your menopausal transition, considerations that you need to do to help support your hormones while you're on birth control, because it actually depletes you most of the time on your progesterone naturally. So then you're going into menopause in a not so great position. So if you want more details on that whole part, you can go back to the previous podcast that we had filmed on that. But today we want to talk about the alternative forms of birth control that are non-hormonal for those of you who feel like you are struggling, still want to be able to practice safe sex or want to be on it for whatever reasons, don't want to get pregnant. What other options there are that aren't going to affect your hormones as much. Unfortunately, when we filmed this, we had some technical difficulties and we were not able to have Brittany on. So now I am re-recording this solo, but I do need to give all the credit to Coach Brittany because she did do this write-up. She did do the research for it. She is a wealth of knowledge in hormones and especially like PMS and endometriosis and fertility. And she's worked a lot with women trying to get pregnant or with their pregnancy or postpartum. She is a wealth of knowledge. So I want to make sure that I give credit to her before I dive into this because she did do a lot of the legwork for this and credit has to be given where credit is due. So we know there's a lot of pros and cons, right, when it comes to birth control and the pill. And on one hand, it has allowed for way more freedom, less concern about getting pregnant. And for some women, they feel like it's really helped them with their PMS symptoms or those of endometriosis. Even some women are using it for perimenopausal symptom management. However, we have also heard the not so great stuff, like, the side effects that come with the hormonal birth control and the pill. So if you decide that you do not want to be on hormonal birth control, or at least you don't want to use a birth control pill, what other options are there for you? So the first one is the IUD. I had the hormonal IUD, the Mirena. That one has progestin. I did a whole podcast on progestin versus progesterone, which will help you understand things so much. If you go back to that, progestin is not the same as progesterone. It can actually have counteractive effects compared to natural progesterone. So if you want more information on that, you can go back to that podcast as well. But there is a non-hormonal form of the IUD, which is the copper IUD. Like I said, we talked about it a little bit before the hormonal version. So if you want to go back to the original birth control podcast that we did, you can go back to that. But there are, again, both hormonal and non-hormonal types. Most hormonal IUDs are going to contain that progestin I was just talking about. They are less systemic than taking the pill, but they do go through your system. So like taking the pill, it's going to affect everything in your body, right? Because you're digesting it. It goes to different areas. The IUD is going to stay localized to just one spot, right? However, it will still turn off your own body's production mechanisms for making its own progesterone, which leaves you feeling not so great because progesterone is the hormone that makes you feel relaxed and calm and stress just rolls off your back. You sleep really well. You feel grounded. You're not reactive. You're not irritable. It helps stabilize your mood. And unfortunately, a lot of us cannot relate to that. Right? A lot of us are struggling with our progesterone levels or are not feeling the calm, cool, grounded, sleeping well kind of thing that I've been talking about. It feels like an anomaly. Like that's not a thing, Steph. It is a thing. but you need progesterone to be able to experience that, right? So for some people, the smaller, more like localized amount of the progestin that you have in the IUD just in your uterus can really help counteract the side effects compared to taking it in a pill form. And it works for them, right? But for some people, not so much, right? They don't want to have hormones at all, or they are, their hormonal side effects are a lot more aggressive. They're more sensitive to it than other people. So the copper IUD is the only long-acting non-hormonal IUD on the market. It can stay in place for 1 to 10 years. And it is just like a small little T-shaped device that is placed inside your uterus. It stops pregnancy in 2 different ways. So number 1, it creates a hostile environment in the female reproductive tract, which stops the sperm from being able to survive. And 2, it also prevents the implantation of a fertilized egg if it does get fertilized. It is 99% effective in preventing pregnancy. The downside to using a copper IUD is that for a lot of women, it's very common for it to increase bleed heaviness. So your bleeds get heavier. You tend to have longer periods when you're on it. You will get some significant spotting in between your periods as well. And some women experience quite a bit of PMS type symptoms on it. So for some women, copper IUD, not an option. But again, I just want to lay out all the options for you because I think it's really important to understand how these things work, the risk factors, all those kinds of things for yourself so you can make the best decision, what is best for you, right? The next one is condoms, the classic male external condom. It is probably the most common and most familiar type of birth control method, right? Depending on usage, it can affect the effectiveness of the method. So 87% effective with typical use, 98% effective with perfect use. Okay, so for preventing pregnancy. So there's a larger range of error with this. Again, it's just a type of barrier method. Condoms work by stopping that sperm from being able to meet the egg cell. It also helps prevent the spread of sexually transmitted infections. Easy to get. There are many different types depending on your desire or if you have specific allergies. There are so many options now. The second one is a female condom. So this is less known about. It's an internal condom. It's very similar to the external condom, except this barrier birth control method is worn inside your vagina. So although you don't need a prescription to access this method, female condoms are way harder to get a hold of for some reason. You can buy them online or sometimes over the counter in some pharmacies. When it comes to effectiveness, the internal condom is 79% effective with typical use and 95% effective with perfect use. So while these numbers are lower than the male condom, a lot of women prefer to use it because it puts them in control, which can be very, like comforting. Like it makes you feel better that like you're in control of the situation, right? So while most commonly we think of the external condom, however, both the male and female condoms can be used to be protected against STIs. So benefits there. The next one is the vaginal ring. This one is a hormone method. The most common one that you might have heard of is the Nuva ring. It's a very thin ring that is a small flexible piece of plastic. It's inserted into the vagina to provide birth control. It works kind of like the pill, but you only need to be inserting it once a month. Its effectiveness rating is 91% with typical use, which is awesome compared to some other methods, right? The ring releases hormones that prevent the ovaries from releasing an egg. You leave it in for 3 weeks, and then you take it out for your 4th week, and then you start all over again. It does contain progestin and estrogen, and the hormones are absorbed by the vaginal lining. And again, this is still hormones, but it's far more localized, kind of like the Mirena IUD. So it's not going to be like all over your body. It's just localized to your pelvis, right? Another one is diaphragms. They are also considered a barrier method. It is made from silicone, and it sits inside the vagina covering the cervix, where it's going to stop the sperm cells from getting to the egg cell so they cannot meet and therefore avoid pregnancy. Keep in mind that while this is a barrier method, it does not protect you from STIs like the male and female condoms do. The diaphragm needs to be placed in for at least 6 hours, stay in place for at least 6 hours after sex in order to be the most effective. And it should also be used with a spermicide just to, better protect yourself. This is a type of cream or gel, and it contains a chemical that, when inserted into the vagina, is going to stop the sperm from swimming so it cannot reach the egg cells. So it's just, extra protection that way, a way to be more cautious. Diaphragms are 83% effective with typical use and 84% effective with perfect use. Diaphragms may not be a suitable option for you if you get UTIs regularly, so that is something just to consider as well. The next one are cervical caps, very similar to the diaphragm, but they are shaped just a little bit differently. Then where a diaphragm is like a disc-shaped cover, whereas the cervical cap looks a little bit more like a little sailor's hat, if that kind of makes sense. These also are more effective when used with spermicide, but can be left in the vagina for much longer, so up to like 2 days after sex compared to the diaphragms. Then where you can get them, so diaphragms or cervical caps, you can get them at pharmacies, at drugstores, or health centers, but you'll typically need a prescription to get one. There are different sizes, so you will need a healthcare professional to fit you properly and show you how to use it before you can get started, just to make sure you are, again, using it effectively. Diaphragms are covered by insurance and are available for free in the UK, which is nice, right? It's very nice to see when these things are being covered for women's health. The next one is tubal ligation. So it's like a vasectomy. It's female sterilization. It's more than 99% effective and a long-term solution. Okay, a long-term option. The procedure is a little bit more involved than with a male sterilization, and in some cases is going to require general anesthetic. So that is, again, just something to consider. The procedure works by permanently blocking or sealing the fallopian tubes. This procedure is sometimes called tubal ligation, or you might have known it as like getting your tubes tied. So while it's safe to have sex as soon as you feel ready after the operation, it is not effective immediately, which is something you should be aware of. So after 3 months, they'll kind of test you to make sure that it is in fact blocked and you are good to go. So until that 3-month time is done and you get that follow-up appointment, make sure you're using another method of birth control at that time if you're not wanting to get pregnant, because you can still get pregnant in some cases. Then we have the vasectomy, which is the male version, right? A surgical procedure. It involves cutting or sealing the tubes that carry sperm. This method is more than 99% effective at preventing pregnancy and should be considered permanent, although it is possible to successfully reverse it in some circumstances. So not for everyone, just for some people. Okay, so depending on your age and other factors, like if you have children or not, or how old you are, you might need to undergo some counseling first before you're allowed to get a vasectomy, and depending on like your practitioner. It's because it is a big thing, right? And if you aren't sure, like maybe you will want kids down the road, it might not be the best option. So like they will probably ask you to go into counseling just to make sure that that is something in fact that you want to do and you understand the consequences of it. Then we have FAM, which is the Fertility Awareness Method. It is a very broad category that includes a range of natural family planning methods, like the rhythm method, calendar method, temperature-based method, and they help you understand and know your fertility indications, or by counting days to work out your own fertile window to figure out like when you're most fertile and when you are not. So take the standard days method just for an example here. It's like a calendar type of method. It requires you to abstain from sex on days 8 to 19 of your menstrual cycle. And then as with other standard method kind of options, it does require you to practice this method for at least 3 months before it can be relied on as birth control, because it gives your app time to figure out like how accurate this is, the fluctuations between how regular you are, and it helps you learn as well. So try and wait 3 months for sure before relying solely on this. It is 88% effective with typical use, and then with perfect use, it's 95% effective. One of the main reasons that people choose to use these kinds of methods is because they offer a natural way to not get pregnant. Right? You're not messing with hormones. You're not adding anything to your body. So a lot of people do like to use this method. It doesn't involve like any invasive procedures or using a barrier or putting in creams or gels or anything like that. But they do require a daily dedication and knowledge to use. So for example, if you choose to, let's say, use cervical mucus as a fertility indicator, you need to learn about the different kinds, how they change throughout your cycle, so then you can identify it, right? Then we also have the contraceptive gel. So Fixie is a new method in the form of a contraceptive gel. It's not the same as spermicide, but it is used in a very similar way. It's inserted into the vagina before sex, and it stops the sperm cells from being able to reach the egg cells by lowering the pH in the vagina. So this does require a prescription. It is a 93% effective with perfect use, and with typical use, it's 86% effective at preventing pregnancy. It should be inserted immediately or up to 1 hour before sex, and it must be used every single time. You can also use Phexxi alongside with some other hormonal methods, but not the vaginal ring. Those two cannot go together. There are a few reported side effects from using contraceptive gel, including like a little bit of burning or discomfort, increased chance of yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis. If you're prone to UTIs, it's also not recommended. So just be aware of that. And then we have spermicide, which is going to contain chemicals to stop the sperm from getting to an egg. They come in a ton of different forms. You've got creams, you've got films, you've got foams, you have gels, suppositories. So spermicides should be used with another birth control method, like a condom or a diaphragm, and they can be used alone, but they're not very effective when they're used by themselves. So you should always be using it with something else. You don't need a prescription for this. The main ingredient that prevents pregnancy in spermicide is noxonol 9, and it's a chemical that makes sperm stop moving, preventing it from joining that egg and allowing you to get pregnant. It's non-hormonal, which a lot of people like, but it can also cause some irritation to some women. Again, increased risks of UTIs, and yeast infections as well. Effectiveness rating is between 79 and 86%, so it's not the highest. There are some side effects there. So again, maybe it's an option for you. Maybe you're pairing it with something else. Just want to give you all the information that you can. And then we have apps like Natural Cycles, Daisy. I use Flow and my Aura ring. Actually, it's what helped us figure out where I was in my cycle. And then that's how we were able to get pregnant when we got pregnant with our son. And this is what I personally like. And basically, it's like an algorithm that helps work out your daily fertility status based on your history, your temperature, and then it'll tell you what your chances are of getting pregnant on that specific day. Okay, so for example, with like Daisy and Natural Cycles, it'll tell you green on days you're not fertile, so you're good to go. It'll tell you when it's red, which means you're likely to get pregnant on these days, or more the chances increase. So if you don't want to get pregnant, make sure you're using another kind of birth control or you're abstaining from sex. There's lots of different apps that do this for you, which is super nice, and it also helps you learn a lot about your cycle, which is amazing. And I wish more women would do it, because we didn't learn this stuff in school. We just learned, don't have sex because you'll get pregnant, right? Like nobody told us like how the cycle works and when you can get pregnant and for how many days and how, like no one told you all of these things. And typically they would just put you on hormonal birth control, right? And we know now there's so many side effects from hormonal birth control. I was reading, I don't remember if it was in a book or what it was, an article maybe, but it's interesting how now we're having a ton more hormonal issues in women who started taking birth control 20, 30, 40 years ago when it became more common, readily available. So now we're seeing all these negative side effects that we didn't have before, or instances of chronic conditions, or, hormonal imbalances and all that kind of stuff. So it's very interesting to see where the timing is in these women. So a lot of women don't want to have hormonal birth control, and they don't want their daughters to be on it, or their nieces, or whoever, right? So I think it's important to understand how all of these hormones affect your body. So make sure you go back to our previous birth control podcast, but then seeing what options there are out there for what you can take. We covered the pill and the IUD and some other hormonal options on that other one, the other podcast that we did. So this one covers more of the other options that you have. With the like apps like the Daisy, the Flow, the Natural Cycles, it is 93% effective and 98% effective with perfect use. So that means you're actually tracking every day, putting in all the information and referring to it. And like, you know, when it says red, you don't do the things, right? So this is, again, one of my favorite things because it really teaches you about your specific cycle because everyone's going to be a little bit different, right? And we are going to see how like stress is going to affect our cycles and all these other things, right? So, and we all know that you can only get pregnant about 5 to 7 days out of the month. So when we are able to pinpoint those days by taking our temperature, that's why I love the Oura Ring. It measures your temperature, checking your cervical mucus, finding out when ovulation happens, using the apps, like using a combination of these non-invasive options, non-hormonal options is really great, but you have to be dedicated to wanting to learn. But if our cycles are all over the place, it also tells us a lot about the health of our body because our cycle is a really good indicator of like, okay, we're struggling with, let's say, low progesterone. We know that's going to be a problem later, way worse problem. So it helps you understand, okay, my hormones are here right now. What can I do to naturally start supporting them? What am I doing that's not supporting my body? And this is where understanding your hormones and your body is so important. There's a reason why so many women are struggling with perimenopause and postmenopause is because we didn't understand our cycles before. And then they go all over the place. We didn't pay attention to what PMS symptoms meant because certain PMS symptoms are indicative of, you know, our body not producing enough progesterone or there's too much estrogen compared to it or our estrogen's too low or whatever it might be, right? So that's going to give us some indication as to what's happening to your body when it goes into perimenopause. It kind of foreshadows that. So being on top of this stuff and learning is so important. And I wish I would have learned this stuff in my 20s. It would have been so much more helpful. So there is, of course, a drawback to the method with these natural cycles and checking your temperature and stuff. There's always a little bit of user error or there's always like a little bit of anomaly. So if you are going to be having sex on those days where it's like predicting that you're more likely to get pregnant, just make sure you're using an alternative method, right? Adding some barriers or whatever it might be. Make sure that you are using the app for at least 3 months or your Oura Ring or whatever it is so you get to learn more about your body before relying on it solely. So you can see, are you consistent? Like, how is your body cycling? All of those things. Again, if there's things that are going to cause variances, like if you're sick, if you are taking medications like certain antibiotics and stuff, decrease the effectiveness of the pill. A lot of people don't know that. Right? I believe that's how Brittany ended up getting pregnant her first time was she didn't realize that was a thing, right? So if you are taking certain medications and drinking a lot one night, there's so many things that are going to be able to affect the effectiveness of your birth control. And they're also going to affect changes in your temperature. If you're drinking alcohol, your temperature is probably going to go up, right? So you need to note those things in these apps because the algorithm doesn't really know those things. So you need to be able to, again, learn about your body and how these things impact your cycle to make decisions for you. There are so many options. So many options. So figuring out what's right for you is your individual choice. So I wanted to list a ton here. Again, go back to the Hormonal Birth Control podcast, go back to the progesterone versus progestin podcast. You will learn so much and really understand what's the best option for you. What is your body going to respond best to? And I think it's always beneficial for you to learn about your body. This is huge because I was on hormonal birth control for decades, like so long. So having to learn my body again was really challenging. Coming off birth control was really hard. When I took my Dutch test, my levels were terrible. I had literally no progesterone, which is not normal. So it took me a while to get levels back up and start feeling myself because I was laying in bed one day and I just burst out crying. And Taylor's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Like I'm just crying." And so this is because my progesterone was so low. So this is where really understanding this stuff is so important. So I hope this was helpful in terms of like learning a little bit about different options. You can dive deeper into all those options as well. But ultimately, you got to do what's best for your body. Share this podcast with all the younger women in your life as well. I think it's really important to understand, and go back and share that original birth control podcast, because you will learn so much about how those hormones and birth control actually affect our body. They are not solving any of our PMS symptoms. They're just masking them. The thing that's causing them is still happening underneath and likely still getting worse. So you need to understand the why behind it all. Again, if you need help with this stuff, just message us. We love you so much, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.